Hey there guys, welcome to DG Gaming Tips, and super stoked to be covering a new game on this channel, which is the TT Isle of Man Ride on the Edge game on the PS4. Hats off to the good folks at Carleton Racing for developing this one. It's a cult crazy competition on the Isle of Man. Never been, but it's definitely on my wish list. And if you watch this channel, you know I'm all about the simulation games. It's what I love, what I'm passionate about. So I thought I'd give you 10 tips on how to get faster times on this excellent game. Let's do this.
All right. I said 1 and 2.
So tip number 1 is switch to or consider trying out manual gears. For those who are passionate about simulation games, then the manual gear option gives you the ultimate control. Now I'm not going to try and hard sell this one because I think folks firmly sit in one camp or the other, but I'm just going to say a few things just for those who are sitting on the fence and haven't tried it. Automatic gears are a great option if you're finding the game overwhelmingly hectic as it is, but manual gears give some interesting options in the corners and during deceleration. You can switch into manual gears by going into options, gameplay and riding style just before you start a race. And for those who are used to manual gears in other driving games like Gran Turismo, you're probably accustomed to the up gear being on the X button and the down gear on the square button. Now the game doesn't actually provide that option in the default settings, but you can provide a custom setting and reassign the keys that way. And in terms of the extra concentration and thinking that goes into operating the gears, watching the rev gauge or the rev limiter lights on the bottom of the screen is probably going to take your eyes away from the more important bit, which is watching the road and the corners coming up. So what's really key is your hearing. Listening for the point in the revs where you need to change up. This is the bit that I want to change up on. And in fact, let's black out the screen just to leave you with that one sense. So I'm going to leave it there for now, but I will demonstrate some of the manual gear benefits in the tips coming up. Tip number 2 is to tweak the riding style settings to hit your sweet spot. Each of these 4 settings at the top represent mechanical devices that help you avoid coming off the bike during acceleration and deceleration. With the caveat being, the higher you set them, the more it's going to reduce your ability to hard accelerate and hard brake. So really you need to experiment how low you can set them while still having the bike behave as you want it. Bearing in mind that the time lost on a crash is easily going to exceed all of these settings pushed to high, so it really just boils down to shaving off milliseconds. But one of the more interesting controls from a macho hard acceleration point of view is the anti-wheelie mechanism. For me, medium is my sweet spot. If I set it to low, then I need to put extra effort in to deal with it on every accelerate out of a corner. Case in point. Now, you can get around this slight imbalance by pushing forward or leaning forward on the left joystick as you set off. And I'm cool with that, that's easy. But the problem is when you go into each tight corner and then hard accelerate out, sometimes I forget to lean forward and you come off the back of the bike and you've killed a fast time. So medium for me is the best setting. And tip number 3 is to get the best start. But hey, what is the best start? I did think when I was initially practicing the game that you start off from 0 and you've got this big ratio of first gear that takes a bit to wind up, that there's no point putting a load of effort in perfecting the start. But when you're racing the single sections, you find that you get to the end and you're actually separated by milliseconds from your competition, so clearly it can be important. So what I'm going to do is try 4 different techniques from a clean start and see if any of them make any noticeable difference on max speed and time at a certain point in the course. First technique is manual gears, and I'm going to accelerate right up to the red line on each gear shift up. So 29.101 on the time and 176 miles per hour, with a little bit of a near miss as I came onto the straight there. And next up is manual gears again, but shifting up before it gets to the red line. 28.6v1, which is getting on for half a second faster and just slightly less on the speed at 173 miles per hour. Next up is automatic gears, letting it decide when it shifts up. Interesting to see how it almost redlined on the first gear but then shifted up quite quickly on the second. Bit of a combination of the two manual effects there. So 28.666 on the time, about the same as last time, and 180 on the speed, slightly faster. And one last technique is manual gears, but lean forward for the whole duration. With the logic being that we must be slightly faster if we can be more aerodynamic, much like the professional racers do. But you can see how I'm wavering more on the small correction terms. It's definitely more difficult to maintain a precise line when you're pushing the joystick forward and turning at the same time. So 28.665 and 180, about the same really. So in summary, there really doesn't seem to be that much difference in the way you accelerate and change gear and any extra technique that you use. I suspect it's actually more about choosing a fast line, and we're going to talk more about that in the later tips, and also just getting that clean start off the line, which I will say one thing about this for the manual gear folks. The exact point where you shift up to first gear is when you see and hear this bit. It's that higher pitch noise after the low rumble after 3 full rotations, so it goes it's that that bit. And roll the tape, please. On film it looks like I'm pressing it on the equivalent gunshot, but I did actually go to press it on the and that seems to be the fastest way to shift up. If you try and shift up to first too early whilst it's still in the rumble noise, you'll find you'll pull more of a wheelie, and you'll probably waste half a second until the front wheel comes down and you can get the hard power on. Anyway, that's probably enough about the start line, let's move on. Tip number 4 is about bike turning dynamics and understanding ahead of the corner at what point you need to start leaning in order to make the turn. Bike cornering works different to cars in that the rider leans in order to effect a turn rather than turning the front wheel. And the effect of this is that the cornering is a kind of a curve technique, as opposed to in a car would be more like a zigzag technique. And this means that you need to start the lean much before the corner than you would, say, turn the steering wheel in a car. Let me try and demonstrate on this first section. The smaller turns are not too bad because it doesn't take too long to go from one lean side to the centre to the other lean side. But it's the tighter turns where it's more pronounced. Rewind, please. This corner at the bottom of Bray Hill is a good example. You see how I'm still mid-slight left turn with a medium right coming up. I actually have to start the turn from left to right with enough time to get into the turning angle that I want when I hit the apex of the right corner. Back to our point about manual gears, I just feel so much more in control when I'm decelerating and hard braking and stepping down the gears and counting which I'm in compared to automatic. Might be psychological, I don't know, but thinking about which gear you're in somehow seems to make you understand better what speed you can turn at. Does that make sense? Anyway, and then another good corner here, hard lean to the left, and then straight into a hard right. Let's see that again. I actually initiate the turn to the right whilst technically I'm still turning left, but the time taken from the hard lean to get up to centre again means it'll still complete that amount of left turn needed, but then I'm ready to get into the right turn as we approach the apex of that corner. That's another classic corner example. In fact, that's 3 link turns together. I think the simple message is if you're in a hard left to right or vice versa, you need to start the leaning process over before you've technically finished the last corner. But anyway, I think you get the message. Let's move on. Tip number 5 is to use visual aids to help you decide where to brake and where to lean in on corners. And I'm going to cut straight to the chase here. Turn off that race line feature. Stop being such a complete pussy. That feature is for beginners whose favourite film is Frozen. It's got no place for people looking for fast times. And let me just quickly demonstrate why it's not useful. For those who've spent a lot of time perfecting section 1, you'll know that the corner at the bottom of Bray Hill can and has to be taken at full speed. So all of those red cross brake indicators are a message to riders who don't like going 180 miles an hour. And also in helmet view, the red crosses are obscuring the most important part of the road and corner that help you decide how to take it at speed. So what visual aids should you be using to get faster times? Let me demonstrate on section 8. This mini track map bottom left is useful to glance at every now and again to understand any tight corners that are coming up in the distance. But as you memorise the track and get better, you probably won't use it. What I do is look straight ahead and pick out any visual feature memories that help you decide what speed, road position or preparation for corner you're going to take. Rewind please and I'll take you through my features on this bit of track. So blasting down this country lane and I'm just picking out those light bits on the road where the sunshine's coming through the trees and lighting up the road and also at the end of the tree tunnel. Until you fully memorise the course section, these little next corner indicators are your best friend. Now, they're not exact, but they are somewhere close to knowing what gear and what speed you should be in. Rewind, please. So I think there's only 3 turn indicators, maybe 4, which indicate the gradient of the curve that's coming up. And this one on screen at the moment is the most lenient of the turns, and for me that means I can either take it at full speed in 6th, or I need to let off the gas a little bit in 6th and take it like that, or I need to drop to 5th. Now each corner in real life is different, and that's why there's some level of variation. So if you can't remember what the corner does, then to avoid crashing, the safest thing is to take the safest of them, which in this game would be to drop to 5th and see what happens. So this is an interesting bit. You see how the indicators are showing 2 lenient left turns? It didn't actually tell me about that slight right turn in between them. So it's not going to tell you everything about the track, but it is a good general guide. Hence the reason to take some caution if you can't remember it in detail. Okay, back to the visual feature memories. A lot of the TT course is actually covered by trees, and in some sections that can make it quite difficult to see where the corners are. So in this corner I've remembered that there's 2 big bits of blue padding around the trees, so I use that as my visual indicator on when to start leaning in. And here with this pointy roof building, after many crashes I've learned that this is actually quite a difficult right and left, so I take it with caution. And next corner, lean right. If you take the right racing line you can probably take that flat out in 6th, but in my case I've taken a poor line, nearly crashed. So the cautious approach actually saved me from a crash there. And I see the bridge and I remember that you can't take this one flat out, so I need to take a cautious 5th gear around here. And that was a PlayStation video save glitch. Now then, I think that's the 2nd turn strength indicator, and for this I know I need to be somewhere between mid-revs on 2nd gear and mid-revs on 3rd gear. If I can't remember it clearly, then I go in cautious on mid-rev 2nd. Same again, need mid-rev 2nd gear. You can take this one slightly faster than the last one. Again, I'm taking it a bit cautiously. I'm not fully practiced on this bit of the track. And same again, mid-rev 2nd gear. Slightly shorter corner this one. And here it is, the classic hairpin turn. Low revs, 1st gear is an absolute must. As you memorise the course, you'll actually stop using these because you'll just do it by sight alone. And tip number 6 is to practice thoroughly each section until you've got it fully memorised. Now hopefully I don't need to convince you that this is the best idea in order to get the fastest times. If you've ever played Gran Turismo Sport, then they were quite wise in the way they structured their driving lessons and mission challenges such that it took you through each of the courses, each of the sections, and by the end of it you were nearly an expert. But in the TT game there's no equivalent journey, so you're just going to have to do it yourself in the solo, quick race, sections menu option. And I'm not talking about spending the next decade learning the intricacies of every corner. I reckon you probably need about 1 hour per section in order to get a fast time that you're happy with. So it's just a case of practice, practice, practice. I'm going to keep doing this for each of the 12 sections. Practice. 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 Yay, practice. I say, old bean, would you mind practicing? Practice. Are we done? Tip number 7 is to ride the racing line with a caveat. Riding the bike at max speed down a straight country lane can be a full-time job, just keeping the bike upright, avoiding crashes and keeping your rider alive. So you'll be forgiven in not perfecting the racing line on each road position. But where it is an important factor is in the corners, to the extent that you have to actually compromise on some of the approach speed in order to get the corner right. So it becomes a trade-off in terms of how many milliseconds you lose by not going max into the corners versus how much time and speed you lose by not taking the corner at its best. Some good examples of this are in these following corner demonstrations. So blatting down Bray Hill into Quarter Bridge, the petrol-head Red Mist has taken control and I've got a good line but taken way too much speed into this corner and don't even make it round. And then second attempt to get the speed under control, but I'm too busy trying to focus on an easy part of the track and I get a bad line into the corner, resulting in an overly slow cornering technique. Just pay attention on that speed and time that we've got going around the track there. And then this is the way it should be taken. Getting a wide line in, tight apex, and ability to do hard acceleration out of the corner. So about a second and a half on the way out, but more crucially higher exit speed, which will allow us to do the next straight part of the track in even shorter time. And then here on section 5, an interesting set of first corners. I go too wide into this first right hand corner and then it makes it difficult and slow to deal with the second left hand corner. And then I'm out of position to deal with this double corner onto the fast straight. And let's just take a note of that time and speed. And we'll try again, this time trying to perfect the racing line. Nice tight entrance, but fluffed it a bit on the pavement. But that was nice, dealt with those two turns like it was one big corner and a fast exit speed. So 0.2 of a second quicker and same speed, which is slightly surprising, but it all adds up I suppose when you factor in the whole section. I think in summary, there's less time savings to be had in the faster corners. The slow corners seem to be where you can really waste time. But hopefully it's pointed out that taking the good racing line on each corner can shave off seconds. And tip number 8 is the importance of what I'm referring to as micro plus snap turns. Micro turns are needed in any driving or riding game where you're continually adjusting the steering to account for any bumps or variations in the road surface. And this is heightened in the case of the TT because you're riding on public roads and not on well-maintained track. So most of the duration of a race you'll spend doing little left and right turns to compensate for the way the bike's moving around when it hits all these little bumps and cambers and that kind of thing. And each time you let off each left and right turn, the game will have the rider come back to centre again. So you're essentially pushing away and it coming back to centre. But occasionally there's times where letting it just naturally come back to centre is not enough. There's times when you lose control of the bike, or there's a tight turn, or an urgent return to centre where you've actually got to snap from one side to the other very quickly to catch it. Let me try and demonstrate. So here at the start on section 10, a little bit of micro turn in there just to deal with the wheel spin on the start with the superbike. Do have a tendency to wheel spin if you don't have a safe controlled start. Let's just rewind that and I'll expand the window on the controller. So you can see there's a heck of a lot of micro turns involved in avoiding crashing and keeping the bike on the racing line. In fact, watching it back, looks like I'm doing way more than I'm consciously aware of. So a lot of this becomes natural over time as you get used to sort of almost feeling the road, and your hand should become automatically connected with your brain in order to know what to do as the bike is turning and you're feeling, I guess, certain vibrations out of the controller. Roll tape please and let's continue. good example of where snap turn was needed there. I was on the verge and I had to bring it back into the centre of the road and then snap turn to stop me fishtailing along the road. Mostly micro turns needed for the rest of this section, a little bit of snap turning, not hugely practiced on this second half of this section. And that was good enough for an overall ranking of 1,984, which is not too bad for whatever it was, 30 minutes of practice. Tip number 9 is to power out of wobbles. On a related note, I remember having a chinwag with a biker once who'd regularly ride over 100 miles an hour, and I was asking him, do you not feel scared or vulnerable travelling at that speed? And his answer was no. Actually, the faster you go, the more planted the bike becomes, both in terms of aerodynamics, pushing the bike on the ground, and also the grip that comes from the back wheel when it's pushing you forward. And that is true about this tip. You're probably most at risk of coming off when you haven't got the hard power down. And like we saw in that last tip, you can avoid some crashes by taking a corrective action, either by snap turn, or in this case getting the power down hard, road space ahead permitting, which will increase your traction and counter some of the bumps on the road better. Let me see if I can demonstrate. See how I almost went into that hedge taking that corner a bit late? But with a clear road ahead, I dropped the power and essentially pulled myself back out into the centre of the road. Similar thing here, my cornering's all out of whack, but I use the power as a sort of a corrective measure to get back under control. Same again, didn't judge the turn correctly, took a bad line in and then used the power to correct it and get me back to safety. And this one, a little bit different. Ride along the rumble strip was a stupid idea. Kept the power on as long as I could, but then was aware I was running out of road, so I had to let off once I got back into the centre of the road, and then when I could see the ability to take the turn, back on the power again. And finally, tip number 10 is to do straight braking, especially when you're going at high speeds. If you watch my Gran Turismo Sport video series, we spoke a lot about this, and the same concept's true for driving cars. And even more important on a bike, because if you get it wrong, you're probably going to kill your little rider. But to quickly summarise the problem, hard braking at high speed when the bike is turning is probably going to result in the tyres losing traction and wanting to skid, or the momentum of the bike weight is going to want to flip or basically go for a little sleep in a hedge. Demonstrations thus. Hard braking, changing down gears, turning a corner equals big mistake. High speed, hard braking, changing down gears, slight turn, basically an invitation for a fishtail. And this one's a little bit unusual. High speed, changing down gears, hard braking. It's difficult to explain why I veered off to the left. The only thing I can think of is there must be a camber on that part of the road which wants to sort of push you left. Anyway, not braking on the flat also gets a... So I guess you're probably thinking, okay clever clogs, what is the technique for safe, high speed, hard braking? Well, this is my take on it. So I do a combination of things. In part, I just let off the acceleration initially until I know I'm in a safe flat position on the road, and then I step down the gears and hard brake, but keep an eye on it. Don't go for one almighty big hard brake and gear down. Hard brake, step down gear, hard brake, step down gear. Just keep an eye on what the back end's doing, seeing if you're losing control, see if the back end's going out. And if that does happen, let off the brakes, do some snap turns to get back in control, and then back on the brakes again. So it's a bit of a high drama phased approach. So that's it guys, give me a like if any of that has helped you to get faster times or whether you've found it just generally entertaining, and consider subscribing if you want to hear about more of my new videos coming soon. And no self-respecting TT video would be complete without a crash reel, so I'm just going to close out with that, and All that remains to say is, until next time folks, happy racing!